In this video, I'll show you how to build automations that can generate monthly income through a website that offers your automation as a service. I'll show you how to build a tech startup using Softr to build user signups, your payment page, and how to design and build all of the internal user pages that your users will need to use your service. First, we'll build out the automation step by step from scratch. Then we'll build out a database in Airtable to support our website. And then we'll build out this entire website using Softr. But before we get into the build, I'd like to explain a little bit about how I came up with this idea. So I do a lot of content automation where we use ChatGPT to transform text into images and all sorts of different things. But one thing we do a lot is we transcribe audio and video into text. And the module we use most is ChatGPT Whisper, which is a great service that will take in audio and video files and it will spit out the transcription. It can also give us an SRT file. So it's a very flexible, powerful video or audio to transcription service. The only limitation of this is that it only processes files up to 25 megabytes. So in a lot of cases, I end up having to use a platform called Cloud Convert, which allows me to take those larger videos or audio files and convert them into MP3 so that the file is much smaller so that we can still use ChatGPT Whisper. And building this once isn't really such a big deal, but I found myself repeating the same automation over and over. And then I also realized that a lot of the time the file is still under 25 megabytes, so I don't always really need to use Cloud Convert. So not only was I repeating this automation over and over again every time I built out a new automation, but I was also overusing Cloud Convert in every situation when I didn't always need to. We only need Cloud Convert when the file is over 25 megabytes. So I just started to think for myself, it would be cool to build out my own little automation API that did this process correctly so that I didn't have to rebuild it every time. And that's always how good software services start. So I thought, oh, I could just build this into a transcription API that I could sell for a low cost, and that I could build this whole thing out really easily in a platform called Softr using Airtable as my database. And so here we are, let's get into the build. Now, if you want access to the make.com blueprint so that you can simply upload the blueprint and have the whole automation built out like that, and access to the Airtable based template, make sure to jump into my new community, the No Code Architects. There's a full make.com course, and you can get access to a bunch of templates like the one you're seeing today. It's a growing community, and you can get access to tech support. All right, so let's go ahead and start building out the API for our users. We're going to use a webhook. This is going to allow all the people that sign up on our website to make a call to our server to perform the transcription and then ultimately return them the text. So to do that, we create a webhook, just like you saw me do, and then we need to create that webhook. This is going to create a remote URL that they can call. Go ahead and click save. This is that URL that they are able to call. So we're going to copy that address to a clipboard and we are going to click OK. Now, in order to test this automation, we do need to create another automation, which is just simply going to call that webhook. So I'm going to come to a blank automation and I'm going to pick the HTTP module and I'm going to scroll down and we are going to make a request. And then I'm simply going to copy that webhook URL from the other automation directly into this URL. I'm going to change the method to post. Then I'm going to add a header. And for the name, we're going to pick content type. And for the value, we're going to add application/JSON. And then for body type, we are going to use raw, and content type. Again, we're going to pick JSON, application, JSON. And now we need to add in the request content. And this is where we are going to send the information that our API needs to process the rest of the automation and do the transcription and ultimately send it back to the requester. So to start, the main thing that we need is the file to perform the transcription on. We are going to send a string that includes the file URL. So we're going to start with a curly brace, open quote, file underscore URL, close quote, and then we're going to use a colon, space, and then we're going to open up another string here. Now, next, we need to actually have a remote file that we can send to our API over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Google Drive. I've already created a folder here and I'm going to jump into my files here and I'm going to upload two different videos, one that is above 25 megabytes so that we can test the Cloud Convert conversion before we send it to Whisper, and then also a much smaller video that is under 10 megabytes that ChatGPT Whisper can process without a conversion. So I'll grab that one and then also this one here, upload it to Google. And then once we have these here, we do need to make these publicly available. So we need to share these two files. I'm going to grab them and I'm going to go to share share. And then here I'm going to go to anyone with the link and anyone with the link. I'm going to go ahead and go to copy links. And I'm going to drop these two share links off in some notes somewhere. Now we have both of those files. You'll see that I already have an existing URL here. This is the actual file URL we want to use when sending our file URL to our API. These share links won't actually work. So we're going to use this URL, and then we're going to substitute these IDs that you see here with the ID here, and that will allow us to access this file publicly and perform the automation. You'll see what I mean in just a second. So I'm just going to duplicate this so that I still have my template. So then right here, I'm going to grab just the ID of this file up here in the URL. You want everything after the slash up into the slash. Don't miss anything or it won't work. Then I'll come back to Notion and I'll select everything here and replace that ID. And I'll just make a note that this is the file that is above 25 megabytes. And then I'm going to come here. I'll open up this URL. I'll grab the ID here. I'll copy that to the clipboard and I'll come back to Notion and I will replace this ID as well. And then I'm just going to make a note that this is less than 25 megabytes. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this URL, the whole thing, I'm going to copy that, come back to our automation here, and right after the quote, I am going to add that, and then I'm going to close quote, and then I'm going to close the curly brace. So you can go ahead and pause your video now and make sure that you copy this exactly as I have. And again, you're going to want to make sure you upload two files, one below 25 megabytes, one above 25 megabytes. You're going to make them shareable, anyone with a link. You'll copy those two links into a temporary place, and you'll use this template here, which you can pause and copy. And then you'll take each of these IDs, you'll create two new links, and then you'll replace those IDs here. And then to get started, you'll take the one that's less than 25 megabytes, and you'll come back and you'll add it here. Now we'll go ahead and just click parse response. I don't know that we'll need that. And then we can go ahead and click OK. So now what I'd recommend is going ahead and saving your automation. And then we can come back to our webhook API. We can save this as well. We can now run this once, and we can come back here, and then we can trigger this automation. We can see that this now fired, and then we can look and we can see that now we have that file URL, which we can then use to continue our automation. So the next thing we need to do is we need to download that file. So I'm going to add another module. We're going to use the HTTP module. We're going to get a file, and for the URL, I'm simply going to pass in the file URL that we passed our API, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now I'm going to go ahead and just add the ChatGPT Whisper model. ChatGPT, I'll go ahead and show more. We'll scroll down to create a transcription. Make sure not to pick create a translation, although that would be a cool API feature as well. If you don't already have a connection, go ahead and add one here. I've already got mine, so I've selected that. And we can go ahead and map in the file that was downloaded here, and we can leave the model as Whisper, and we can leave the prompt blank, and the response format JSON is fine as well. We'll go ahead and click OK. So now let's go ahead and test our automation. I'll save it. I'll go ahead and run once. I'll jump back to our tester here and I'll run this, jump back to our automation. It's now downloading that video file, and now it's sending it to ChatGPT Whisper. Because it is under 25 megabytes, we should have a success here. And there is the transcription from the video that was uploaded to Google Drive. So now to finish off this automation, what we need to do is actually respond back to whoever is making that API call to our service. In this case, it's us just testing it. But again, what we're doing here is we're really creating our own transcription service, much like this ChatGPT Whisper module that now needs to respond just like this one does and gives us the transcript. We need to take this transcript and respond to this request here. So we're going to add one more module. We're going to go ahead and use webhooks. In this case, we're going to use a webhook response. For the status, we'll return a 200. And for the body, we're going to go ahead and create a JSON. We're going to open that curly brace, add a quote. We're going to type text, and we'll close the quote, add a colon, we'll add another quote, and then we're going to pass in this value here, text, and then we'll close the quote and then close the curly brace. So go ahead and pause your video and copy that here. And then we do need to go into show advanced settings, and we need to tell what type of content we're sending back, which is a JSON. So we're going to add a custom header. For the key, we're going to type content dash type. And then for the value, we're going to type application slash JSON. And then we're going to go ahead and click OK. I'm going to go ahead and save the module. Then I'm going to go ahead and run once. And then I'm going to jump back to our tester module. And now I'm going to trigger this. It's now waiting for the response from our automation over here. It's doing the transcription. And now it did the webhook response. Let's take a look at that. So we have that JSON here with the text, status 200. So now if we come back here, we can see it responded. And we're going to see the status code is 200. And if we look at the data, we have that data here that we could then use in our own automation to finish things out. So if we zoom back out for a second and remember what we were doing, what we've done is we've created a single automation that we can use over and over again, which again is replacing what we have to do over and over again every time we want to use some sort of transcription service. So now we have one single call that we have to make to our new API, which is going to execute these same modules over and over again so we don't have to build them. And then again, we'll be able to create our own web app so that we can charge people for this service as well. So everything seems to be working. Now, the only thing we need to add here is the ability to process files that are larger than 25 megabytes. Again, remember in this automation here, we are using Cloud Convert to first convert those large files into something smaller that ChatGPT Whisper can handle. But instead of doing it this way, where we always use Cloud Convert, we're only going to use Cloud Convert when this file is greater than 25 megabytes. And so to do that, we're going to show you something called an error handler. I'm going to go ahead and come here and add an error handler. And the error handler I'm going to use in this case is called resume. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to create a separate path of automations that correct the error that happened here. And so in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to detect that error where the file is too large, and then we're going to convert it, then we're going to transcribe it, and then we're going to send that text back to this path so then it can finish off with a success. And so to continue, we're going to go ahead and add another module here. In this case, we're going to use Cloud Convert. We're going to convert a file. If you don't already have a connection to Cloud Convert, you'll need to add that here. For the input file, we're going to go ahead and use import a file from URL. And then for the URL itself, we're going to go ahead and use the file URL that we passed into our webhook. You can leave the headers alone. For format, go ahead and make sure to pick I don't know the input format. And then for output format, we're going to pick MP3. And then for file name, we'll just go ahead and use the same file name that was detected here. Now we can leave this conversion and engine specific options alone. But if you really wanted to compress this video file down into an even smaller file, you can use these options to produce even a smaller file in case the video is a really large video. You could use this to compress it even further. We'll go ahead and download the file. We'll click OK. And now what we need to do is we need to call ChatGPT Whisper one more time to rerun this automation with the newly converted file that is much smaller. Actually, I just realized I made a mistake. We're not going to want to use the same file name because this is an MP3. So I'm going to come back in here and I'm just going to type in file.mp3 instead. I'll go ahead and click OK. Then I'm going to add another module. This time it's going to be a ChatGPT module. Go ahead and show more, search for transcription. We'll use transcription. And instead of the HTTP file that we have here, we're going to use the file from Cloud Convert. For model, we'll use Whisper. You can leave the prompt blank. For response format, JSON is fine. Go ahead and click OK. And then in the resume here, we're going to go ahead and add this text, which is going to be the result from Whisper. And then we'll go ahead and click OK. So now you can see what's going to happen. When this errors out because the file is too large, it's going to come down to Cloud Convert. It's going to make it smaller. It's going to rerun that process. And then it's going to replace the error that happened here so that it can continue on. And then we'll pass that text back again to the automation. Notice we have text here from module 3, and that's what we're replacing right here, text, except we're getting that value from step 8. So now remember, we only want to run this path on a specific type of error, not just any error. We will want to add a filter here when we learn a little bit more about what that error looks like, and I'll show you that in just a second. So I'm going to go ahead and save the automation, and then I'm going to go ahead and run once. And now before I trigger this again, I'm going to come back to my notes, and I'm going to grab the Google Drive link that is above 25 megabytes this time. I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to come back to our trigger module. I'm going to go into the file URL, and I'm going to replace this Google Drive link with our greater than 25 megabyte file. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I'm going to click save. I'm going to go ahead and trigger this automation, jump back over to this automation here. We had an error, so now it's coming down this path here. It's now converting that file into a smaller file. Now ChatGPT Whisper is going to convert that smaller file. Then it's able to resume and then finally pass that transcription back to our input module. And now if we take a look at the data, we see the text. And now we have that transcription from the file that was much larger than 25 megabytes. And so now I'm going to take a quick look at this here, and then I'm going to look here at the handled error. And it looks like the type was runtime error. And basically it's giving us this message here, which is the maximum content size limit. So that tells me that I can come back here and add a filter. Let's take a look. I'm just going to grab something here so that we know which error to handle, because there's other types of errors that might come through here. And we don't want all errors to come this way. We only want the errors that are related to the file size limit. So now I'm going to add a filter. And for the condition, we're going to use the message, and then we'll simply say contains, and then we'll put maximum content size limit. And now if there's other types of errors, it will error out and it won't go down the path where it's trying to convert the file. It'll only do it when the file is too large. I'll go ahead and test it one more time just to make sure it works. Our new filter, and then I'll come back here to our trigger and I'll go ahead and run once. It was able to detect that error in our filter. Now it's converting that file into a smaller MP3, which ChatGPT Whisper can consume. It's able to complete, it replaces that text, and then it finally responds back to our HTTP call. All right, so now let's go ahead and build out our Airtable database so that we can start to store different users and control access. And then we'll update our API call to authenticate users before we perform the action, just to make sure that they are a paid user. And then once we have the database built out and we've updated our API call, then we'll go ahead and build out our user interface. And if you're enjoying this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. It tells me what type of content you want more of. All right, so now let's go ahead and build out this database. Now this isn't anything that the users will interact with. This is simply a database that will keep track of our users and their API keys and the history of all the different API calls that they have made to be the back end of our website. So we have our website that will take payment, but somewhere we need to store all of the different users and keep track of them. And so we're going to use Airtable to do so. So I'm going to come to Airtable. I'm going to go ahead and create a new base. We're going to pick our workspace and start from scratch. Now, luckily, this is a pretty simple database that we're going to build. I'm going to go ahead and close getting started here. And I'm going to put transcript SaaS DB. I'll leave the purple color. I'm going to delete these fields here. Everybody's going to need a name. We'll need to have an email for each user. We'll use an email field, and then we'll type email. We'll go ahead and create the field. Then each user needs an API key. So we're going to add another column. We're going to call this X API-key, X-API-key. We'll go ahead and use a single line text. We'll go ahead and add a checkbox called active, which will keep track of whether they have an active subscription or not. Create field, and then we'll go ahead and add a created date. Scroll down, look for created time. You can actually leave the field name blank. It'll just name it for us. And now we're going to add one more column here. And this time we are going to link to another record, and we are going to create a new table. For the field name, we're going to go ahead and call it history. And this is going to end up creating another table, and we'll name that table history. And it's simply going to keep track of all of the API calls that a specific user gives so that we can show them their history in their user accounts. And we'll allow linking to multiple records to allow them to have multiple entries connected with their user account. Go ahead and create that field. And notice it now created that history table here. So now let's jump up to the history field. Actually, before we do that, let's rename table 1 to users. Click save, then let's jump over to the history. For this first field here, let's go ahead and change this to something else. I'm gonna go ahead and edit field. We'll call this the ID, and then we'll change this to a formula. I'll scroll down, formula, and I'm just gonna use the record ID. You can type rec. This is gonna pop up down below, record ID. Then just close the parentheses and click save. That's gonna give each record ID a unique ID, which is the internal Airtable record ID for each row. Go ahead and confirm that change. And this column here is basically linking back to a user. We don't have any users in our system yet. I'm gonna go ahead and put in myself, Stephen Pope, Stephen@sgplabs.com. And for the API key, I'm just gonna put test API key, and we'll go ahead and say that I'm active. And now if I come back to history and I open this up, I should be able to add in a user. Let's clear out these other users that are here. Now, obviously, once we build out our user interface where people can subscribe, we are not going to be manually entering in any of these values here, nor are we going to be adding in these history rows here or connecting them up to specific users, but I'm just doing this for testing. I'm going to rename table 1 here to user. In this case, we don't need to link to multiple records. Each history row will only link to one user. I'll go ahead and click save. I'll confirm that change. Now for each history, we're going to go ahead and store in the URL that they sent to us to transcribe. So we'll type in the file URL, we'll create that field, and then we'll also save that text output in case they want to access it later. We'll use a long text and we'll type text output. Don't enable rich text formatting, leave that off, go ahead and create the field. And then let's go ahead and add a created timestamp. I'm gonna scroll down. Again, you're gonna grab created time. You can leave the field name blank, it'll add it for us. create field. And now we've pretty much got the makings of our database. I don't think we really need anything else. Now what I'd like to do is to just come back to our API and update it so that we can authenticate against our new table here to make sure that they are a real user and that their API key is valid and that they are active. And then also making sure that once we make a call, we will update their history so that we can keep track of all of their API calls. All right, so now let's hook up our API call to Airtable database so we can control who actually uses it. We only want actually authenticated users with a valid API key who are active, who have gone through our website portal and have actually paid for a monthly subscription to be able to make a call to our API. And so just as a preview of what that's going to look like, what we're going to do is we're going to add a authentication module here, which is really an Airtable search right before we get into the bulk of the automation. And then we're going to check and make sure that there's actually a valid user giving the credentials. And if there's not, we're going to send them an error message. And if there is, then we're going to continue on with the automation and then ultimately do the conversion, do the transcription. And then we're going to write their transcription into their history. Remember, we had this history field here. And that way, when they are in their user account, they can get a history report inside of our SaaS application to see all the previous transcriptions they have done. So the first thing we need to do is now, when we make our HTTP call, instead of simply sending the file URL, we also need to send the API key. So I'm going to add an additional variable here. I'm just going to hit enter on this curly brace here, put a comma, and then I'm going to go to the next line and I'm going to add a quote, x-API- key, and then I'm going to put a close quote, a colon, and then just for testing, I'm going to come over to our Airtable database, and I'm going to grab this test API key, jump back to the automation, put that into our request content here, and then I'm going to close quotes, and then I've got the curly brace here. So that should be all I need. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I'm going to save the automation, and then I'm going to jump back to our API call, and I'm just going to run this one module here. I want to make that call, bring it in here so that we have that variable to use throughout the rest of it. And instead of running once down here, if I just run this module once, it won't actually run all of this other stuff here, which will take a while. So now we're waiting for the request. I'll come over here. I will run once, sent over the request. Now we have it here. Now we're going to have that X API key. Now I'll be able to add a Airtable module right here. Add module, pick an Airtable module. Here we are going to execute a search. Now we need to add a connection to the new Airtable database that we just created. So we'll add a connection. For connection type, we'll go ahead with Airtable OAuth. We'll pick transcript SaaS demo. I'm going to put number 2 because in a previous test, I already used that name before. And I'm going to click save. It's going to bring up the OAuth Connect pop-up. We're going to add a base. I'm going to type SaaS. It's going to pull up the 2 databases that I've been using. This is the one that I'm using in this demo here, transcript SaaS DB. I will grant access. It's going to create that connection. It's going to give us access to that base. I'll go ahead and select the base. And now for the table, we're going to pick the users table. Now we don't actually need to select any fields here because we're not actually using any of the data we search for here in any of the other automations. All we're using this search for is to determine whether there is a valid user with the same API key that is sent in the webhook. So we don't need to worry about anything here. What we need to do is we need to create a formula that is going to ensure that there is a user with the right API key and that they are active. They have an active subscription that they paid for over in our web portal. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to construct a formula, and I'm going to start with the and. And what that's going to do is it's really creating an and condition here where the 2 conditions that we check for must be true in order for this search to work. And then I'm going to use a curly brace, and I'm going to type X API key, and then I'm going to close the curly brace equals, and then I'm going to use this variable that we passed in the trigger HTTP call over here. I do need to put these in quotes, so I'm going to put an end quote there and then come back right here. So we've got and open parentheses, open curly brace, X API key, close curly brace equals quote, and then the API key that we sent, and then close quote. And then we're going to put a comma, and then we're going to use another curly brace, and we're going to say active, close curly brace equals 1, and then we can go ahead and close the parentheses. And then here on the limit, we're going to want to make sure we only pick 1 user. And then from here, we can go ahead and click OK. And then we can click save. And then just to test this out, we can run this module once, and it's looking for that API key. So if we come back over here, it's test-API key. We can come back here, test-api-key, and we can run that, and then we're going to see the output, and it was able to find an entry. Now let's kind of test a few other scenarios. Let's say that they had the right API key, but the user wasn't active. Now let's go ahead and run once again, test API key, and now it came back, and now the total number of bundles is 0. So let's turn this back on, and let's change the key, put a 2 in there, and we'll run once again, test API key. Now I'm not putting the 2 here to simulate that the API key changed. We did activate the user, but now the API key is different. We'll click OK, and now it's still coming back empty. Let's fix the API key, and I think you can assume what's going to happen here. Run the module, test-API key, click OK, and now we have that bundle. So when we have a bundle, we know that it was successful, and we can continue down this path. Otherwise, we need to give the request here an unauthorized access error. So now I need to add a router here that will go down one path if there's a bundle, and another path if there is no bundle or result from this here. I'm going to align everything just to get everything back into shape. And I'm just going to go here. I'm going to add a router. And on this condition here, we are going to look at the bundle order position. And then this condition here, we're going to look at the total number of bundles, and it should be equal to 1. We'll go ahead and click OK. And then we're going to add an additional route, and let's go ahead and align everything once again. And then we're going to make a condition here, which is looking at the total number of bundles. And in this case, we're just going to say is not equal to 1. So if it's anything other than 1, remember we limited the search here to only return 1. So it's either going to be a success or a failure. And then we'll click OK. And then here what we need to do is we need to add a webhook response right here where we are responding with an error instead of a success like we do here. So I'm just going to go into this module, webhooks, webhook response. Status is 401, which is unauthorized access. And I'm just going to jump back to my test automation here. I'm going to grab the error code, drop it in here, and then I'm going to come down here to the advanced settings. We're going to add a custom header. For the key, we're going to type content type dash type is application/JSON, and then we'll click OK, and then we can click save. And then one other thing I'm going to do before I run this is I'm going to create that entry here, which is going to add to our history. If we look at our history right now, this was a test record that we had, so I'm going to delete that. Come back to our automation. I'm going to add that in here, add module, Airtable, create a record. Now make sure you add the connection. You might have to update the permissions. We only gave this connection the ability to search. Now we need to be able to actually create a record. So we're going to update those permissions. It's going to bring up the OAuth screen once again. We're going to add our base. SaaS, grant access. Now we can go ahead and pick the base. This time we are going to pick the history for the table. For the user, we're going to go ahead and add an item. And for the record ID, we're going to pass the ID from this step here, ID. And then the file URL is going to be the file URL that we passed from the API. And then for the text output, we're going to use the result from ChatGPT Whisper. And then we can go ahead and click OK. And then we can go ahead and save this. And now let's go ahead and test this out. First, I'm going to go ahead and run once, and then I'm going to jump to our API. And I'm just going to adjust this key to be incorrect. I'm going to put that 2, and I'm pretty sure we removed that 2, right? So I'll go ahead and save, and I'm going to run once. And notice it immediately comes back with an error. And if we look, it's error 401 unauthorized, error unauthorized. And then if we look at our actual automation, we can see that we got the webhook, we searched, we didn't find anything, and so then we returned with our unauthorized error. And that would also happen again if we disabled the active as well. Because again, if we look at this search, we're making sure that we have a valid API key and that the user is active. It's an and not an or. So if we come back to our automation here, our trigger, and we go back to the valid key, we'll go ahead and click OK. We'll click save, and then we'll come to our automation. We'll run once, and then we'll trigger it. Notice now it's not responding with that error, and it's just waiting for us to respond. And now we've gone down this path. We've gotten the file. We went to ChatGPT. It was bigger than 25 megabytes. Now we're doing cloud convert. Now we're doing the transcription. It'll resume. It'll come down this path. It'll create the history record, and it will respond to the user. Let's check it out. We should have the data here in the text. There's the transcription. And then if we jump back to our database and we look at the history, we now have a history for this user where we have the original file name and we have that text output. And again, this isn't going to be something that the user has access to, but it is going to be the database behind our SaaS application here. And they'll be able to look at all of their history, including the video URL and that text output. So there we go. Now we have the automation set up to properly authenticate. And the only thing left to do now is to build out our user interface. I am going to do one thing in our Airtable database before we move on, which is to automatically generate a API key instead of having this text here. So I'm going to jump over to automations and I'm going to add a trigger, and we are going to trigger when a row is created on the users table. And then I'm going to add a action here. In this case, I am going to run a script which requires a paid Airtable account. If you'd like to avoid that, then you will need to generate the API key in a different method, maybe in make.com, or of course you can just manually enter it. I pulled this code from my other demo that I previously built. I'll link to it in the description below so that you can cut and paste it. Keep in mind that there are 3 fields here at the top of this script. If you went through the installation just as I did and named things just as I did, with the user table being called user and the API key column being x-API-key and the active column being called active, just as it's said right here, then you shouldn't have any issues. But if you named them something different, you will need to change these at the top. We do need to add in one input variable here, record ID. Keep in mind, this is case sensitive. It's lowercase record with an uppercase I and then a lowercase d. And then we're going to map in Airtable record ID from the trigger. And that's all we need there. So we can go ahead and click finish. And I should be able to just turn this automation on. And again, if you don't want to pay for Airtable and automatically generate the API key from a script, you can find another way to do it. Or for testing, you can just put in a manual API key like I did here. But now when I create a new user, it should automatically generate that API key for us, just like that. So now we have what looks more like a traditional API key in this X API key column generated by this script here. And so now we're good to go. I'm going to delete these extra rows, and now we can get over to Softr to build out the user interface and to add in our payment system through Stripe. And then we'll be able to give this out to people and start making some money. All right, so now let's go ahead and actually build out our user interface where we can log in and sign up and build out these different pages that any given user might need to go through, including giving us payment to use our new API system. So I'm on the Softr platform, and you don't actually have to create a paid account to do what we're going to do today. If you want to publish your app with your own domain or something like that, then you will need to purchase an account. You can check out the pricing right here. I'm going to go ahead and log in. And here I have a bunch of other apps that I've been using for testing this out. We're going to create a new app from scratch. It's going to give you some default pages that you can use to get started. Make sure you include the home page, the sign up page, the sign in page, the reset and forget password, the user profile, and then also this list details page. We can turn these other 2 off. We won't be needing them for our specific application. It's going to create that app once you click create application, and then it's going to put together this template that we can start to use and fill out. Now it takes a little bit of time to get used to their user interface and how it works. It might be a little confusing to start, but what they do here is they stack these different elements. These are actually 2 different elements here, and this is a different one, and this is a different element as well. And no matter what page you're on, they show you all of these different elements so that you can see how your app will react based on whether people are signed in or whether they're a user or whether they're a paid user. And so we'll just slowly go through all these different things and clean it up and add the different pieces, and I'll explain things as I go. But our API is pretty simple. We really just need to accept payment from our users. We need to let them access the history from the API. If you remember, we store all of the API calls that they do in Airtable, and we also store the API key in Airtable. So in Softr, we'll need to give them a page to access their API key, to access the history, and then also to access documentation on how to actually call our API. So let's just start to go through here and clean things up. I'll go ahead and rename this application. We'll call it the Transcription SaaS demo. And one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to settings, and I'm going to go to data sources, and we don't have any data sources connected with this app yet. And what we want to do is we want to connect this user interface with our Airtable database in the background. So I'm on the home page here. I'm going to go ahead and click this, and it's going to ask us for a data source. And I've already got a couple here, but I'm going to go ahead and add another one, and we are going to connect it up to Airtable, and we'll go ahead and click continue. And then just like we did in our make automations, we have to connect it to a base. I'm going to type SaaS And then I'm going to use the one that we built together, the SaaS DB. I'm going to grant access. And now because we've connected it, we can select the base just like we did in Make for populating these fields here. And then we can select the table. In this case, remember, this is our history. So I'm going to go ahead and just select the history. At some point, you're going to get this getting started pop up. I'm going to go ahead and close it for myself. And now one of the first things that we need to do is to filter this data so that it is only showing the history for the logged in user. So I'm going to come down here to add condition, and then I'm going to go ahead and select a field if, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick user. And that is referencing, I'm going to go to the history tab here. That is referencing this user here. And now I'm realizing here that there is a missing field that we need in order to make this work. The way Softr does authentication is it is keeping track of the username and the email. And we want to use the Softr email to help authenticate which records to bring back in Airtable. And we did add that email here to the users table itself, but we're trying to access the history records and we don't have access to that email here that we have here. So back in the history here, I'm going to add a lookup field and I'm just simply going to click on the email. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull in the email from the users table into the history table so that then we can use it to filter in Softr. So we'll let that run now. And now we've got that email here and I'm going to come back to our Softr install. It might be that we need to refresh the table here. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit refresh to get that new field in there. Let's go ahead and come down here to the if. And now we have that user from email. That's the one that we really need. And then we are going to change this to includes exactly. And then we're going to select the logged in user and then we'll grab their email. So again, what this is doing is it's saying from our table history in our base, make sure to only show the rows where the email from user, which is referencing this column here, is exactly the email that is logged into Softr. So Softr is keeping track of that email and it's going to help us filter down these results based off of the email in Airtable. So everything's looking good. Let's go ahead and come up to content and start to show us exactly what we want. Right now, it seems to be showing a profile picture, which we don't have. I'm going to go ahead and just hide that. That's this image here. It looks like it's showing the ID from Airtable by default. That's fine. You could display something else there if you'd like. You can just pull this down and you can select which content column it's pulling from, and you can select the type, what heading it is. Again, I just removed the image that was right here. It also has a divider. We can leave that there. For the label, that is a built-in label that you can change that we really don't need. We don't need either one of these columns here, so I'm going to delete this label and then also this one here. And then we have the file URL, which is the URL that the user passes the API. And then we also have the user. We don't need the user because we're filtering by the user. So there will only be one user here at any given time. So I'm going to also delete the user field and also this label field. We don't need that as well. The only things that we really need to see is the file URL and the text output. So now I'm going to add a field. This will be a text field and the content is coming from the text output, which is mapping to this text output that we added to our history. Go back to Softr, we'll add that text output. And then that's really all we need for the history. I'm going to go ahead and remove the search bar. And then we've also got some of these other filters. I'm going to go ahead and remove these as well. Just delete them. That was the stuff that was right here. And now I'm just going to reposition these fields. So if you come to each of these different fields in the sidebar here, let's go ahead and work with the file URL first. You can click this here and then come up to content, and then you can control the width. So I can make that a little bit larger. That's good enough. Let's leave most of the room for the actual text. So I'll come back, then I'm going to go to the label, and then I'm going to go up to content, and then let's adjust the width just like that. So as we develop more rows, then we'll see just the rows for that particular user. And we've got this see more down here, and I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'll leave that see more there. Not hurting anything. And then we've got this add record. So we're not going to add history rows from the user interface. They're only going to be added when we call the API directly. So let's see how we can disable that. I think if we go to actions here, we can have the add record button and we can delete that. Starting to look good here. And then we've got these other objects here that really don't apply to us. So I'm going to click into this box and then it looks like these are features here, which I can just delete. And so now the only thing left here is welcome, logged in username. This is your home page. And I'm just going to update that text to say, this is your API history. And we'll just keep things simple for now. And then anytime you want to just look at how this looks in real life, instead of looking at it through this design editor that we have on the left here, if you just click preview, it's going to open up a window and it's going to show you what it looks like for a non-logged in user. So that tells you one thing. Well, it seems like we're showing some information that we probably shouldn't show somebody that isn't logged in. You can see we're previewing as a non-logged in user, and I don't really have any options to check a real user. And that's because we haven't actually connected our Softr application to our Airtable database yet. So I'm going to come back into Softr and let's correct a few of these things as we go. I'm going to come over to users here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sync with data source. And here I'm going to sync with the new database that we just added. Select the base. We'll select the table users. And now what it's going to ask us to do is to map the email in Softr with the email in Airtable so that it can keep things in sync. So it's really just asking us what field in our user table is the email. So I'm going to select the email, and then for name, I'll pick the name. And then for avatar, I'm going to leave that blank. It's optional. We don't need the magic link. And it looks like the created date is optional as well. So I'll just leave those blank. And then I will go ahead and save and sync. And then let's go ahead and refresh the table. We now see the user that we manually entered into Airtable when we first did this. So now actually, if I come back, I'm going to close this preview. Let's go ahead and preview it again. Now, again, we're looking at this as a non-logged in user, but we now have the Stephen Pope user that we manually put in here. You're about to preview this system as a specific user. Go ahead and read that. I'm going to go ahead and say don't show again. So now it's going to refresh as if I'm looking at Stephen. And so now you can see here that it's showing us our history from our history here. And it's using this email as a filter so that it's only showing the history from myself and not other users, even though there's only one user right now. But again, if you remember, if we were looking at this from the non-logged in user, it looked a little weird because it's showing us a page that seems to be like we're logged in, but then there's no results and it's just kind of confusing and it's saying sign in. And obviously there's something not right here. So I'm going to jump back to our application. Let's jump back to pages. Let's go to the home. And so what we need to do here is we need to change the visibility of this page here. We really only want to show these different things when somebody's actually logged in. So we can come to visibility. Who can see this block? Logged in users. And we can do the same here. Visibility. Who can see this block? Logged in users. So now if we looked at that preview, we wouldn't have these two blocks here that just don't seem correct. But there is still something missing here. If somebody comes to our landing page and they're not logged in, they need to have a page where they can see what the site is all about. They might want to see an image that tells them what the site is all about, and then they can sign in or create an account or do those different things. So I'm going to add another block that is below these two header blocks here. One of these header blocks is for non-logged in users, and this other one here is for logged in users. And so we're going to add a block just below, and you have these different options down here. Let's scroll down and see what makes the most sense. Let's see what's in user accounts. What I'm really looking for is that typical hero image right here. So I went to static, and here's hero. So it looks like right here we can go ahead and add a new block. So this is what people will see when they are not a user. Let's just double check the visibility here. Visibility, it's showing all users. We only want non-logged in users to see this. I'll go ahead and leave this image, but we'll update the title. We'll say easy video transcripts for less money. So that's our headline. And then we could put in a sub-headline, use our API to get instant transcriptions for your videos and audio files. And then we've got a button here. So it looks like this button is saying request a demo, but in reality, what we should probably say is create an account. And then we can add an action, which is open page. And then you can decide whether it should open a new tab or keep the existing page. Scroll down. We don't need anything else there. That looks good. So now if I do a preview, it's going to open up another window. And now for non-logged in users, we're seeing the sign in or sign up. And now we've got that hero image. We've also got these controls for just viewing how it looks in other browser types or tablets or phones. And then we can actually create an account, which would take us to the sign up page. So we're making progress. Let's go ahead and add the additional pages we need. Then let's go ahead and add in some navigation. And let's just test everything without payments. And then we can test everything with payments. All right, so let's go to pages. So I'm going to add another page. This one we'll call API key. Let's save. It's It's going to create that for us. So now we could add a new block for that. Let's go ahead and add other page for documentation. Save. So now if we come over to pages here, we've got documentation, API key, home, list details. That was one of the ones we imported. I don't think we're actually using that. Let's take a quick look. Yeah, we're not actually using this. So this could be a page that we just delete. Let's go to the documentation real quick. And since this is an API, I'm going to go over to the static. I found this earlier. And down here in other, we have a code highlighter. So this allows us to put in code to access our API. And we've got these code blocks on the side here. So I happened to build this out before in my other app. So I'm just going to copy and paste that code. You'll want to configure this to be equivalent to your app. So we'll go into label here. We'll type HTTP, and I'll just pick HTML there, and I'll copy in this code. And so this is going to give the actual HTTP code that someone would need in order to call our service. Remember, they need to call our make callback, and that's the information here. You'll want to copy in the webhook information that is in your automation and replace that with what I have here. And then again, remember, we have the XAPI key that we tell them to pass in that JSON, and also the file URL with that public URL. And so then I'm going to add the JavaScript and the curl as well. So I'm going to jump over to this block, JavaScript. Let's grab this. So now obviously we are doing this from make. So this might look a little foreign to some of you, but there are many different ways to call an API. And these are just some alternate ways if you're not using make.com, if you're writing an application in JavaScript. So now I added in that secondary block there. And then we have one more for curl. So let's take a look at that block here, curl. It's going to grab all of this code and we'll just type curl. I'll select what's in here and drop that in there. And so now we've got that documentation inside our app. It's kind of nice that they already had a block that really kind of mirrored what we already had to do. Now let's go ahead and just add a little bit of navigation here. So I'm going to go ahead and select this block here. It's telling us that in order to update the navigation, you do have to be on the home page. So I'm going to go to the home page. Going to check out the navigation here. And so basically you just add these links just like this. It looks like this one is more of like a drop down link. And then this is a static link with no drop down. And I think that's just because we have multiple links here. In our case, since we have so few pages, I'm not going to use the sublinks. I'm just going to delete this one. And then we have our home page, which is our history. So I'll type home and then / history, and then we'll add an action, open page, and we'll go to the home page, and then we'll add a link, and we'll say API key, add action, open page, API key, then we'll add a link, documentation, add an action, open page, documentation, scroll down a bit, show user profile. So that's going to show this here, and it looks like we've got a few links here for my profile and sign out, which is good. Then it's asking us for orientation. Do we want to put the links on the side or do we want them to be in the header? In this case, I'm going to have them on the header. Do we want a fixed header? That's an option. I'm not going to worry about that too much. So I think that's it. You can add your logos, check out the styles here. I don't think we need to mess with anything here. We've already set up this. This is good. So now let's just kind of see where we are. I'm going to go ahead and do a preview. This is the non-logged in user, which can sign in, sign up. This is going to create an account as well. I probably should change that to sign up. Going to go to the user view now. So now saying, welcome, Steven. This is your API history. That's this link here. Then I can go to my API key, which we haven't built out yet. And then we can go to our documentation. Here we have the HTTP call. Here we have the JavaScript and the curl version of how to call our API. Again, remember, you need to change the documentation here to point to the webhook for your webhook. You'll copy that right from here, add that into the documentation, into the page itself. Remember, if we just jump back to documentation and we go to this element, you'll add that right here. And then the domain right there. So depending on these different types of code that we added in, you will go into each of those sections and update the URLs accordingly. So the last thing we need to do is simply to update the API key. So I'm going to go to the API key and we need to add a page here. Let's just go ahead, and I think this is the one that we used before. Let's just use that same one. We know how to use it. Again, in this case, we're going to pick the source. We're going to use our Airtable database, the transcript SaaS database table. This is going to be from the users this time. And we're going to add that conditional field so it only shows us our API key. Going to come down here. Again, we're going to use the email field is the logged in user email, and that looks good. I'm going to scroll down a bit. And now what we need to do is just modify the way this looks. So I'm going to come up to content. I suppose we can say the name there. That's fine. We don't need to show the image. I'll go ahead and hide that. We don't really need a divider here, although I guess I'll just leave that. We're going to show the X API key, but everything else we can pretty much delete, because that's the only thing we need to see. So just make sure you delete all these columns except for the X API key. We don't need a search bar. We don't need these filters. I'll delete those as well. We don't need the see more. So I think if we just remove the text here, it'll disappear, and we don't need the add record actions. Now this could potentially be used to reset the API key and to create a new one. But in this case, let's just go ahead and delete this. And then we just need to adjust the formatting here. So I'm going to go to our content, go to the X API, I'm going to open this up, go up to the content, and then for the width, I think I can just expand this. So for Stephen Pope, the X API key is this. That means that when the user creates their account, they'll be able to go to this page and copy and paste this into however they're making that API call. So I think we're pretty good now, although we need to change the visibility here so that it's only shown to logged in users. Going to come to who can see this block, logged in users. Actually, did we do that for documentation? Let's double check. I don't think I did. Visibility, you see, got to check all that stuff. Let's actually publish this, and let's create a new user, and let's see if it creates that row here, generates the API key, and lets us log in. So I'm going to come back to Softr. Instead of doing preview this time, I'm going to actually publish it. It's going to let you pick a subdomain. I'll go transcript, SaaS, demo. Now that I got the domain, I'm going to come up and publish one more time. Looks like there's something wrong with my subdomain. I'm going to pick something else. Subdomain available, publish, open a new tab. It looks like it's using the old URL here. So let's see if I copy this, publish, and let's see if I come out of this. Sometimes applications are just a little wonky. I'm going to refresh. Now let's see if I open it. Does it go to the right URL? There we go. We are not logged in. So let's go ahead, and we can't sign in. If we do sign in, it's going to take us to a login, and we could sign up. Let's go ahead and put an email. If you don't know about this, whenever you're testing logins, you can put your main email, and then you can put a plus, and then you can add anything else after that. And then you can use your normal email after that, the domain, the @ domain. And the emails will still go to steven@sgplabs.com, believe it or not. But that plus, test, whatever you put, will allow you to keep using the same email and going to the same email, but you'll be able to test multiple times just by going from test 10 to test 11, test 12. I'll go ahead and put in a password, full name. Got to agree to the terms, sign up. Let's jump over to Airtable. Oh, there it comes. That's cool. And then we got the API key, and then it took us to the documentation. So there's probably some page that we'll look at that sent us first to the documentation page. So that's pretty cool. Come back to our app. I'm going to close some of these other broken windows. So it took us straight to our history, our home page. Obviously, we haven't run our API key against the system yet, so there is no history. We should be able to click our API key, and it starts with B2. If we come to our database, that's B2. So then I should be able to take this API key, take it back to our tester here, right here. Going to update the API key, save it, and then come back to our automation. I'm going to do a test run. So now we're going to authenticate against our new user that was made in Softr with the new API key. We'll trigger that, and it was authenticated. It found the record. Now it's actually doing the work. It was greater than 25 megabytes. So now Cloud Convert is running. We've got that smaller MP3. Now we're sending that smaller MP3 to ChatGPT Whisper. And then we created the history row, and then ultimately responded back to our request here. Now let's just double check our interface. Let's go up to the home/history. And now we've got that new history that's for this user instead of this user. So everything's looking pretty good. And again, we could replace the logo and everything. And we've got the ability to go to our profile and sign out. Documentation is here, got the API key, and we've got the history. So really the last thing that we need to add now is just the ability to add payment. Softr is syncing together with Airtable. It's adding new users and everything's working there. So let's just add the payment piece with Stripe, and then we'll be good to go. All right, so let's continue forward. I did notice a little thing here, a little label was not correct. Really, this should say file URL, and then it should say, transcription output. So if you wanted to fix those little things, it's pretty easy to do. We can go to pages. We're at the home page already. So this label here, we go to content. That's just right here. So we could just change this to transcription, fix the spelling mistake, and there's that. So we're looking good here. So next up, what we need to do is integrate this with Stripe. And this is actually really easy to do, a lot easier than I thought it would be, which is nice. So the first thing we're gonna do is jump into the settings over here, and we're gonna go to integrations, and then we are gonna come over to Stripe. And if you open this up, it's going to be looking for 2 different keys that we need to add. And so if you just click on this link right here, it's going to take you to your Stripe. Be careful that you are using a test account to get started. If you already have an existing production Stripe account, make sure that you do not use that. And you also want to make sure that you are in test mode. So what I did was I came up to my Stripe account, and I have all of my different accounts right here, and I just created a new one. You don't have to go through a big registration process. And I'm just going to type in transcription, SaaS, demo, and then I'm just going to go to create. In order to accept real payments, you would have to go through that whole thing and activate everything. But just for testing, it's already in test mode here. We can go ahead and go to the developer page, and then we can go to API keys. And it looks like it's already generated those just by creating the new account. So for the publishable key, you just click on it and it's going to copy it. We can come back to Softr, and we're going to drop that right here. And then we're going to come back to Stripe, and we're going to get the secret key, and we're going to copy that, and we're going to drop that right here. And then we can go ahead and click save. And then we're going to jump back to Stripe. And what we need to do is we need to go to our product catalog, and we're going to add our first test product. And we'll just call this the monthly transcriptions service. You'll want to make sure it's recurring, and you go ahead and put in the price. We'll start off with $99 a month. The billing period, you can add a description. Don't really need to for testing, and then we're just going to add that product. And we're just going to create one plan. We're not going to create a bunch of different plans that people can choose from. That makes it a little bit more complicated, but it is possible to do. And again, this is a test account. So when we actually test this on Softr, we'll be able to enter a credit card and test it and see it coming through to Stripe without actually running our own cards to do this. So now I'm going to jump back to Softr, and now we're going to go up to pages, and we're going to add a new page. And for this, we're going to call it checkout, and then we can go ahead and click save. And then from our dynamic blocks here, we can come down to payment, and then we can pick the different payment option we want to pick. This one is for changing plans. This is for accessing a billing portal. And this is the one that we want to use for creating the checkout process. Just go ahead and click the plus button. It's going to add that page. And then from here, you can configure this page. I'm not going to change the logo or the placeholder. I'll go ahead and just leave checkout. For the product, we should be able to select now from the one that we added into Stripe. And then we can change the name. This is a monthly transcriptions service. No trial. The price was $99. Interval is monthly. I'm just going to go ahead and take out the description. We don't have a discount code, so I'll turn that off. For the payment details, we'll have the full name and email, and then we've got the button for subscribe now. That should be good. And then on checkout, after payment, you can select which page they should go to. Maybe they should go to the documentation so they know how to use the system and your API. Now what we need to do is we need to create a user group for paid users. So we're going to have users that are not paid, then maybe they just signed up and they haven't checked out yet and given us payment, or maybe they canceled their subscription. So we're going to come over to users, and we're going to go to user groups, and we're going to create a user group. We're going to call it paid users. We're going to go ahead and go to next, and then you can add users based on a condition. In this case, we're going to add a condition if they have a subscription, and then you can say, is any of this subscription. If they have a subscription and it's this one, they are going to be lumped into this new group that we just created. Save. And then we're going to come up to pages here real quick, and we're going to go to page rules, and we're just going to set up the behavior for what happens if you are a non-logged in user, or if you're a logged in user, or if you're a paid user. So if you're a logged in user, that means you haven't paid yet. So after sign in, we're going to send them to the checkout page. Same for after sign up. And then after sign out, we'll just send them back to the home page. And then if you wanted to set up pages for unauthorized access, you could set those up and you could redirect people there as well. For paid users, after sign in, you're going to want to go to homepage. After sign up, we selected this from our checkout page, so we can just leave that. And after sign out, it'll go back to the homepage. So that looks good. I think everything is good to go. Let's go ahead and go up to publish updates. Let's open up that new tab, and then let's go ahead and log out. And then let's create a new account. I'm going to create a new email, Stephen Plus. Remember we showed you this. steve11@sgplabs.com. Put in a password, full name. I'm just going to use something a little bit different. Steve Pope. I tell people to call me Steve or Steven, just not Stefan. And then I'm going to agree to the terms, and then we'll sign up. So this is going to create the account, and then it should take us directly to the Stripe where we can then check out. There's our email. We can put in our credit card number. 4242424242424242. I think you do have to put in an expiration that is in the future. There we go. And then we can go ahead and subscribe. This is actually going to do the charge on the back end because we have a test account. Let's jump over to Stripe. Let's look at our transactions. And now we've got that coming through. It just took a second to get in here. And now if we jump over to our Airtable database, that new row came in with their email, generated the API key. And of course, it redirected them to the documentation because that's what we put on our page rules. So I'm going to jump over to the API key. I'm going to grab this one more time and just test it out. Go back to our test trigger, update the API key, and click OK. Then I'll click Save, run back to our automation. Just make sure this is a valid API key and it's working. We'll trigger it. It's coming through, valid, authenticated. Now it's just going through that same process as always. So again, if you want to get access to this make.com blueprint and this Airtable database so you can install it in one click, make sure to check out my community where you can get access to a Make course and then also a bunch of different built-in templates just like the one you saw today. It's a growing community. You have access to calls almost every single day, and you've got a place to post your tech support to get help on your automations. I hope to see you there, but either way, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you on the next one.